I'm once again coming to you from the Heart of a Shepherd with today's daily devotional. We are continuing our scripture reading in Psalm chapter 62 and chapter 64. Now, the title of our devotional is I Shall Not Be Moved. Now, our scripture reading again, Psalm 62 and 64. However, this devotional will be taken from solely Psalm 62. Well, you're going to notice there is a familiar refrain in today's scripture reading, and like many of the Psalms authored by David, while I cannot confidently say the occasion that inspired these two Psalms, yet the subject, the content would seem to fit the trauma and sorrow that David suffered when Absalom, his son, led an insurrection against him. Now, each of the Psalms, again, affords us an insight into the wicked bent of men and their nature. Again, this Bible study is taken from Psalm 62. I do want to remind you that if you subscribe to heartofashepherd.com, you'll find the scripture that we're studying has brackets in it that I've taken the time to amplify word meanings that I believe will help you a lot in your daily studying. Well, as we come to Psalm 62, I first of all want to invite you to notice in verse 1 and 2 David's confidence and dependence in the Lord. Now, though hated by his son and hunted by those who wished to kill him, David declared his faith in the Lord and said, in verse 1, truly, or that is surely, my soul waiteth upon God. Now, the idea of waits is the idea of resting. So David, in spite of all the troubles that were around him, in spite of those things over which he might have fretted and worried himself, as some would say, silly, David says, no, truly my soul waits upon God. From him cometh my salvation. Rather than looking to men, he was looking to the Lord. And then in verse 2, he continues, he, that is the Lord, only is my rock, that is, he is my fortress, my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be greatly moved. Now, if ever there was a man who had cause for a panic attack or paralyzing anxieties, it was David. And yet, though driven from his palace by his son and pursued by evil men who desired to kill him, the king's faith in the Lord stilled his soul. David confidently declared that the Lord was his rock, his fortress, salvation, and defense. And so with boldness the king proclaimed, I shall not be greatly moved. And then consider with me David's observation, verse 3 and 4. Here he gives us insight into the fact that evil men prey upon the weak. Now, David's song invited Israel to consider the moral decline of men and how they prey upon those they despise. Now, while I say with certainty, I wonder if the king had Shimei's curses in mind when he penned verse 3. You might remember 2 Samuel 16 and verse 7 through 13. And here we read in Psalm 62 and verse 3 then, how long will ye imagine mischief? Speaking of his enemies. And the word mischief there is the word for assault me verbally or shout at me. How long will you shout at me? Imagine mischief against a man. And then David goes on and he says, ye shall be slain or struck down, all of you, as a bowing or bending wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence. In other words, when a fence begins to lean or a wall begins to lean, invariably it will fall. Well, David, reflecting on the ways of the wicked, continued, and he says, they, that is the wicked, only consult or they plot and they plan to cast him down from his excellency. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Selah. Really, it kind of reminds you of modern man, especially politicians who are forever flaunting their promises and yet disdain the very ones who elect them. David's musings on the ways of the wicked were recorded 3,000 years ago, but I would suggest to you that nothing has changed. His portrayal of the character of evil is mirrored everywhere in our world. Dishonest politicians, liberal media, power brokers, they all lie, distort, and destroy the testimony of good men and women to get ahead with their political agendas. They probe for weaknesses, and should they discover them, they'll attack them with a vengeance. When evil men cannot find a notable fault, then they court the favor of the righteous on the pretense of being their friend, only to curse them behind their backs. You see, it is the nature of evil men to sting a good man's reputation with lies and assault his character. You and I should not be surprised when a godly man is attacked by those who intend to break his spirit and bring him to shame. And so then we ask the question, how should believers respond when they face the cruel, unrelenting attacks of the wicked? Well, notice Psalm 62 and verse 5, 6, and 7. Now here David modeled the answer to that question really in the balance of Psalm 62. The king stated his confidence in the Lord, therefore he would wait on the Lord, hope in him. He declared the Lord alone was his rock, his fortress, his salvation, his defense, and his refuge. And then I would invite you to consider David's exhortation, verses 8 through 12. Now, David's focus, you'll notice, turned from his testimony and experience to encouraging others to turn to the Lord. The king urged believers in verse 8, trust in him at all times. He urged them to pour out their hearts before the Lord, for God is a God of refuge. Now, the king made two universal observations concerning the nature of men. You'll notice, first of all, that he warned that, quote, men of low degree or men of high degree are deluded, empty shells that are, quote, lighter than vanity. Vanity being the word for emptiness, having nothing, no substance, no character. In verse 10, therefore, we should never put our faith or confidence in men or riches. Well, a closing thought for you, and it is this: what can we take from Psalm 62? Now, if we are sincere, there are many things that we observe and experience in life that are neither fair nor just. The wicked attack and they defame. They curse and they lie. And you and I will inevitably spiral into a pit of self-pity and sorrow if we forget the Lord. And yet we have the Lord and his word. And he has spoken and assured his people that he is all we need. And therefore, we can be sure the Lord is just and he will render to every man according to his work. Well, thank you for being a part of this Heart of a Shepherd devotion. What a challenging thought it is to realize that there will always be enemies of the Lord and enemies of the righteous in the world. And yet the Lord's promises never fail. He is ever our refuge, our rock, our fortress, our salvation. By the way, this world is a world that is often unfair, and there is often seems to be no justice. But we can be sure of this, that in God's judgment there will be a day, and every man will be judged according to his work. May God find you and me faithful until he comes. God bless you, and bye-bye.